This is a Renegade Media Network podcast. You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Happy New Year to all of you. Happy 2022. January 2022, which means as Counterflow, this show's been on for about a year. Before that, of course, most of you know, was called Death to Tyrants. January of 2021 is when we switched over to Counterflow, so happy birthday of sorts to this show. And as I record this, it is my birthday. This will drop January 4th. My birthday is January 3rd, and should be a fun day today. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you guys for all of the support this last year, by the way, and I hope to get to keep growing the show in the new year and interact with more of you guys, meet more of you in person. I got to meet a good amount of you over the last year or two, so I've enjoyed that. And speaking of events and places where I can meet you, as you probably know, we had the RU Texas, the Renegade University Texas event here at my house. And everyone keeps saying, are you going to do that again? We are going to do another RU event. I have an idea of where it's going to be at, but I don't want to say it just in case it's not accurate. I don't want to get inaccurate messaging spread on this podcast, of course. So I'll keep that under wraps for now. But at these events, it's really fun, and it makes you feel like, wow, I'm not crazy. There's a lot of other people that see the world, maybe not even in the same way that you do, but a lot of us see the same craziness from the others out and about. And so it's good to get like-minded people together. And that's what we did here at RU Texas. And that's what this episode is from. It's the live in-person interview I did with Tho Bishop and Matt Erickson. Both of these guys are good friends of mine. And soon, Matt Erickson is going to be living not too far from here. So that's coming in the next few weeks. I'm excited about that. And as I record this today, Tho Bishop is going to be on Steve Bannon's show. So check that out too. It's an episode that records on January 3rd. It should be out this evening. By the time you listen to this show, it will be out. So maybe check that out too. But I'll get to it. This is my friends Tho Bishop and Matt Erickson on Counterflow Live from RU Texas. Let's get to it.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to my house, my yard. I'm Buck Johnson, the host of the Counterflow podcast on Thaddeus Russell's Renegade Media Network. Formerly Death to Tyrants, as there's a gentleman out here with the old school logo. But I figured I've got my friend Matt Erickson here from the King Quill Show and also from Well Powered Influence with Jason Stapleton. Give Matt a round of applause. I've got Tho Bishop on the other side of me. Tho's on the right-hand side, of course. He's from the great nation of Florida. You know Tho from Radio Rockbard, associate editor at Mises.org. Tho Bishop.
Hey, and one of y'all got a beer. What the fuck's wrong with you?
I got a margarita sitting right there. I have to feel like I do when I'm actually doing the show. So it popped in my mind last night. Might as well have these guys up here. I saw multiple people throughout the evening at the VIP thing here last night. I got to ask Tho a question. Hey, Matt Erickson's here. I got to ask Matt a question. So I will be asking them both questions, and you guys, we're going to do kind of a Q&A, less formal than the other ones we were doing. I guess we'll jump into this really quick with kind of some nice surface level stuff, because some of these guys sometimes can say things that rub people the wrong way. So we'll get into some of that kind of topics as well. But Matt, first time in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
The best thing oh wait, you know what? Real quick, thank you. Yes. In the back, there's a cause that's very near and dear to my heart. If you live here in Texas, there's a movement called Texit, and that would be where we get to leave the union. For For those of you that aren't from here, you're welcome to maybe move here once we do that. We'll see. We might have some strict border stuff. We'll see. But there's a table back there. If you live in Texas, go give them maybe your signature. They'll explain the rules, and there's some stuff in there to explain about politics that I don't want to get into. But go sign the I guess the petition, yeah, essentially, to get Texas on the ballot so we can vote on that here in Texas. Imagine that. But let's jump into this. What do you make of this event, Matt? I mean, I could border this question with lots of stuff, but I'll blanket it with that. This event.
Number one, it was a lot bigger than I expected. There's way more people than I was expecting. I heard like we're gonna have it at Buck's house. I was thinking like some people in a living room kind of, and which is typically par for the course for I guess libertarian to libertarian adjacent events. It always seems like it's kind of a small group, relatively speaking. So to see this many people who have in some cases traveled really far. We came from Southern California. To see this many people who have all, shout out my son in the back there. What's up, Eastwood? To have this many people who have traveled this far for something like this has been really cool to see. And it's given me sort of a vision of the future, maybe. That's part of the thing that my wife and I are here in Texas, specifically to scout it out and see what we think of it. We've never been here before. We wanted to see what it's like for ourselves. And it's seeming more and more like the best option to move to for a variety of different reasons. And so if we moved somewhere, we didn't want to do it sight unseen. So coming here and kind of feeling the community, having this, like, there's this one single like dynamic that kind of binds everyone together. We all have this single thing in common. And people call it lots of things. Liberty is sort of probably the catch-all term. But in I guess you'd call my day job, I work with Jason Stapleton. I co-host the show Wealth, Power, and Influence with him. And then he has a job where he works with entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, teaching people basically how to create income mobility and make them basically create liberty in their own lives by controlling the source of their income, making that income mobile, and then connecting themselves with a tribe of people who feel the same way because there's strength in numbers. And there's the really cheesy, like Tony Robbins' way of saying it is that there's power in your net worth and there's power in your network. And ideally, you want to have both. You want to improve your own net worth, and then you want to improve your network. And so part of that job, I get to sit on the phone talking to people all the time, all across the country, who are at various levels of beginning or growing, scaling, expanding an entrepreneurial venture. And it's kind of blown my mind how diverse the group is culturally, religiously, geographically. There's people all over the place at all different levels of wealth and or lack thereof. But they all have this one thing that binds them, which is this drive for freedom, for independence, for liberty, and not just for themselves, but they have a passion for everyone wants to change the world. Everyone has a passion to do this, not just for myself, but to do it for everyone. Everyone's kind of like, well, we want to save the whole world. We want to make everyone libertarians. And obviously we go on at length about various things related to that I don't know if we'll get into that today or not. But to me, I appreciate that spirit. I appreciate that desire to achieve this, not just for themselves, but for everybody. And to have organizations like Renegade U or the Nomad Network that Jason started, to have organizations of people who are interested in the political side of things, but it's like for a purpose. There's this personal development part, whether it's in history or business or law or whatever the specific venture is. There's this self-development aspect of it that I really enjoy, and I think the university system is such a plague. It's such a toxic dump on the society, and so to be able to create alternatives like this where people can go to learn things and kind of leave the whole credentialing system behind and just talk to people who know what they're talking about. I think that there's something really valuable about that, and I think that this is the wave of the future. People self-selecting into groups of people who are like-minded and and doing what you're going to do with your own group. That you don't necessarily have to to work with everybody. You can work with your own small tribe. I think there's a lot of power in that, and past human civilizations have known that and understood that. And we're moving, I think, kind of we're going forward into the past to a degree, where we're kind of returning to some of these concepts of having where tribalism is a good thing. Tribalism is a positive term with positive connotations, where I'm personally invested in my tribe with the people who share my values, who share geography, who share blood, whatever the relationship is. Being invested not just in yourself, but in the better interests of those who are part of your tribe. I think that it's very encouraging and uplifting to me to see that in action.
He said that Texas might be the place to move to. I feel that you may have a different opinion. I want to ask you about Florida, of course, but we talked last night. I was reminded of it when Matt was talking about the university system, and you said, I used to think this about the universities, now I think this about the universities. Talk about that and what needs to be done with them.
Well, first and foremost, I think this is one of the interesting pivots that we might be seeing happening right now. Because for the longest time, like the mainstream political right, they've treated the border issue as like the number one demographics is destiny sort of aspect that forever dooms however your definition of America is. And I think what we've seen the past, particularly the last 4 years, is that the biggest demographic driver to the left is the current university system more than the border. The insecurity issues of the border create issues when it comes to crime, it comes to other issues, but it's not necessarily a voting issue, in part because of citizenship requirements. So my opinion has always been, okay, well, the goal should be deconstructing the university system as it comes to be. And generally that should be the goal. But I think there is a middle route that we need to start considering. And I think we're starting to see this play to a certain extent with the battles going at CRT at the primary level. But we need to be thinking about directly purging and replacing state universities with scholars that are not detrimental to the existence of the communities that they reside in. Every Marxist that receives a government paycheck in a red state is a public policy failure. There's nothing that keeps them there, absolutely. I mean, it's simply a lack of political will of a state of Florida, for example, not purge every single, self-identified Marxist. And and obviously there are areas for abuse of this. There's areas of abuse of any sort of thing out there. But ultimately, I think that's where the energy has to start being, because, as so long as this current university system is funded, and more importantly, the demand for the university system that is within this current state apparatus of funding and all that sort of stuff, so long as these things exist, there is an opportunity, I think, within states, different intellectual environments. Because it's interesting, you go back and read like the works of Mises, one of the things he talks about is, because like after World War II, there was a conversation whether the country of Austria should exist at all because of its history there and whatever. And he'd point out that, one of the things that makes Austria so important is the unique intellectual traditions that had been cultivated within this nation. And he was talking about the institutions that were in place for that. And I think that one of the things in the short term to help cement a lot of the gains that we're making is putting that thumbprint on the way these dollars are being used currently within the existing system to promote ideological institutions closer to our direction. Because again, the degree to which, the acceleration that we've seen within these university systems. I mean, the university system is what creates a third generation Cuban to be a communist. Mm-hmm. Right. And so again, all the questions about open borders, all the questions about this sort of stuff, it's all, economic benefits, et cetera, fine. But until we deal seriously with the fact that our institutions turn people against the stability of the nation, everything else is kind of distractions from that. And so I think that's, and the beauty of it is that, the failures out there are creating out the opportunities for, options like this. The Mises Institute's been providing content for scholars and resources for a very long time. We've got our own Mises University program in the summer. We now have our own master's program, which is a $5,000 master degree. So you have these alternatives being out there by the market. But in the short term, when you have political power, to the extent that you can also wield that to the advantages of your ends, this is sort of stuff that we should be considering to the extent we can.
I think one of the things I've learned from you in our discussions, and I hear from the outside world, there's a misunderstanding or maybe just kind of a lack of awareness on how Ron DeSantis affected your life. You know, there's a lot of us here that have been amongst the LP for many years, and we're used to saying, well, both parties are the same, and they're blood-soaked monsters and all of this stuff. There's people still concerned about what DeSantis' foreign policy would be, as if Florida actually is a country right now. But talk about the impact that he's had personally on your life. What was it, 12,000 votes or something like that?
33,000.
33,000 votes away from being way, way different. So speak to that and how that's impacted your life. And maybe he wasn't just like the other candidate. Right.
Well, again, like, as early as, May, June of last year, you would walk into a dive bar and no one was wearing a mask, in Panama City. It was, we had a very, very short, very minor, lockdown in April. And outside of that, his strength, his executive leadership, it has made all the difference in the world. But, it's interesting though. I mean, even before DeSantis, one of the little experiences that kind of started changing my opinion on some of these topics was simply going to our DMV. Because like the DMV is the go-to punchline for libertarians talking about incompetency in government, right? The DMV is, shorthand for a bad time. Well, we elected a new tax collector in 2016, a guy named Chuck Perdue. He's a great, he's a tax attorney. And now if you're in Panama City, you go to the tax collector, you put your your RSVP on your online, it's 5 minutes in and out. Like it is a great customer. It's the Publix of government services. And that's where I started realizing, okay, there's something to be said about, there's nothing about government that rewards efficiency, right? And often there are incentives that reward being bad at what you do, right? The SEC never caught Bernie Madoff, but got a big ass pay raise because they failed to catch Bernie Madoff, right? That's usually the incentive structure in government. But there is something to be said, though, about having talented people in positions of executive authority. And it's true at the local level. We've seen it play out in the differences in outcomes in America on who is your executive. And I think that's an aspect of it where, we as libertarians, we treat all levels of government, or we can easily fall into the trap of treating all levels of government as exactly the same. And there are structural difficulties with the monopoly of violence and et cetera, like, right, there's those commonalities between all of that. And you should never fall in the trap of, thinking that your local government, because there's a ballot system that truly represents you, right? You should always see it as an outside force, et cetera. But your local government's different than the federal regime. And one of my most controversial opinions, perhaps, is that within the current political structure, like I am a proud lowercase d Democrat. Because if you look at it, what has been the means for which people skeptical of the regime have been able to wield tools of any sort of significance? It has been through the electoral process with the masses organizing outside of corporate boardrooms and outside of, creating culture and things like that. Like that's been the one lasting battleground, has been the ability to win elections. And so when you see that there is an opportunity here to check power, using that sort of organization, it can play out again, obviously at the state level, not only in who's your governor, but in initiatives like Texas. It can play out in some of those underlooked battles, like in Florida, the agricultural commissioner has a lot to do with the way you get a gun permit, and I think it's something we fail to appreciate. Your local sheriff is one of the biggest things on depacting. The sheriff can be a major bulwark against tyranny coming into your home and your communities. And so there are degrees to which recognizing that there are outcomes from the electoral process that are major pluses to your quality of life. I think DeSantis is a great example at the state level, but you can see it throughout. And that's been one of my, and because once you recognize that, then there are different questions that go beyond purely ideological questions or other things. And so that's what we've been trying to dive into.
Yeah. Matt, I want to get into some of this stuff where sometimes you say things on podcasts or you tweet things. It seems to ruffle some feathers here and there. There's been some pushback here and there. I think you might enjoy some of that. Do you consider yourself a libertarian?
Oh, man. Oh.
No. That's a pause. See, that's the Michael Malice thing, or some people better than others.
Yeah.
You didn't give a speech, you just gave a long pause.
Yeah,
Let me ask you this then. We don't have to get into the relationships, but you were a very foundational part of the Mises Caucus.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, what's kind of popped into your head, so to speak, on maybe some changes of mind that you've had?
I'll say this. I want to live in a libertarian world. I think that libertarians have identified the ideal legal structure. But in order to get to that point, you can't act like a libertarian. Acting like a libertarian, the actual effects of what, as libertarians are, if you can kind of take libertarianism as a political force right now and look at the effects that it's had on the world, it hasn't increased liberty to the extent that it's cost lots of time and effort and energy. There isn't a from an economic perspective, this isn't a political force that's on the cusp of taking over the world. And there's forces that are the opposite of libertarianism that are very much on the cusp of taking over the world. So there's this word that's been thrown around a lot that it has a lot of other connotations, I guess, to a lot of people, especially those very familiar with the online left. But the word is praxis. And it's very similar to praxeology, which is something that's familiar to a lot of libertarians. And the praxis is, okay, what do you do with this knowledge? What do you do with this theory? How do you take this theory and apply it to the real world in a way that will promote libertarian outcomes? And what I'm seeing within general libertarian communities at large is not that. I don't see this a move toward liberty. I see a desire to convert people to libertarianism, which when I began recognizing that and recognizing that association with Christianity, that there's a very close tie between evangelical Christianity and libertarianism in this sense that we have this truth, we are this remnant, and we have this gospel to preach to the world. And then it just so happens that both of them fall into the same trap, which is that the value of the ideology is in memorizing a bunch of facts or pledging allegiance to a bunch of dogma. But then when it comes to actually changing the way that you live or participating in movements or organizations that are improving outcomes for people, there's far less of that. Now, there are individual people, and there's this thing about libertarianism that everyone's an individualist, so it's kind of like, oh, we're all going to go our same direction. We're all going to go our own direction and do our own thing. And that's fine, that's great. But when you're in the realm of politics, the people that are all going their own direction become the fuel for the machine that will grind them under its wheels. You have to be consolidated, and you have to present a united force to accomplish anything within the political realm. This is just a fact of politics. So libertarianism applied to the existing political system results in more tyranny, not less, because it becomes, the system exists as a machine, as an alchemical machine that takes resistance to it and converts it into tyrannical power. So when you begin attacking it, if you go at it, if you try to combat it on its face, if you say, we need to roll back the state, we need to tear the state down, we need to end the Fed, that sort of mentality is great if you have the power to do that. If you don't, you are just inciting it, and you're creating a pretext for you to be seen as an extremist and to be ground down. Now they have a pretext. You've just volunteered to be the enemy. That the mass mind control machine that is the media, the universities, the press, that mind control machine that controls the vast majority of the population now has the perfect straw man to hold up to justify everything that they want to do. So libertarianism, modern libertarianism applied to the political system becomes self-defeating. This was the realization that I ran into. So you asked me, do I consider myself a libertarian? I want to live in a libertarian world. I want to engineer Ancapistan. I want to live in a world that respects private property absolutely. But a world that respects private property absolutely is going to be very authoritarian. Enforcing property is an authoritarian act.
property is a threat of violence. It says this is the line beyond which I will inflict violence upon you if you cross that line. That's property in action. So the idea that I have no problem with people who say I'm a pacifist or like politically speaking, I don't want to vote. I don't want to do all these different things that I consider aggression. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's great. But you can't then take that mentality and enter the political realm and think that you're going to achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve. There's a disconnect between the theory and the praxis. And that's where a group of us just kind of started talking about these things because we want to solve this problem. We see an issue where there's a lot of people rallying behind big political causes, but the question we're asking is, okay, and then what? So you get on all the major platforms, you deliver your message to all the people, and then what? What's the call to action? I've been working with Jason Stapleton. He's a marketing guy. The most important thing about your sales pitch, and anybody who's trying to spread liberty is engaged in sales. This is just the definition of it. You are making a sales pitch. The most important part of your pitch is your call to action. At the end of the sales page, if you don't have a button that says click here to buy, people won't click there. You have to tell them what to do. And I'm getting involved with the Mises Caucus, and I'm like, okay, well, what's my call to action? Come join the Libertarian Party? Okay, well, what do I have to offer them? All these other parties are offering them all these things. Right, yeah. What do I have that's going to make their lives better? And is that most effectively delivered through a political party? Do I have to get involved in a political party to actually change someone's life on an individual level? Or people be like, well, there's all the people who don't vote. There's like, what is it? If did not vote would win every election because the majority of the populace doesn't vote. So is that the target now? So now I need to go pull people who are not involved in politics, and I need to go out engaged in activism to pull them in and get them involved in politics. That didn't make sense to me. So then what? So we get a whole bunch of people rallied up, believing that the state is evil and the state is responsible for all these bad things. And then what? What do we have them do next? There was no clear call to action. And without a call to action, your sales pitch will fail every single time. Without a clear, powerful, concise call to action, your sales pitch will fail every time. So this is, you asked me, do I call myself a libertarian, or do I think I'm a libertarian? I went on a journey that led me to the point of calling myself a libertarian. It's kind of changing. You're getting more people now who are born into libertarianism, who are born into a libertarian family, but it's kind of a young movement. So the majority of people who got to libertarianism read or reasoned their way to that point. And I did that. I went on a long journey through a bunch of really goofy ideas before I finally, I considered myself like the most extreme ANCAP you could imagine. If I was trying to find the most 100% pure Rothbardian positions I could find. And I valued that. I valued those ideas. I want to see those ideas realized. But in order to, once you start studying power and you start studying how to actually apply these things to the world, the libertarian approach just doesn't generate libertarian outcomes. So I don't feel like I did this long journey up to the point of Rothbardianism. And I feel like I've continued that journey. I haven't turned away from it. I've gone deeper into it. Tho said something the other day about pre-libertarian in reference to Mises. And I thought that was a really interesting thought, that it's like libertarianism is the goal. That's the end. We're trying to get to that point. But how do we get there? What's the means that will actually get us to the point where we live in Ancapistan?
Well, Tho doesn't exactly live in Ancapistan, but he certainly lives in a place where I feel like he thinks there's quite a bit of liberty, and obviously there is. Everyone's going there. I always hear, I'm thinking about moving. It's either to Texas or Florida. Funny how it's never to California or New York. I want to talk about 90s Rothbard, because that's something that you and I like. We do the live casts on my YouTube page, reading the Rothbard Rockwell reports. How can you relate 90s Rothbard to kind of the situation we're in currently politically in this country? It's something that a lot of libertarians will quote Rothbard, but it's always, I notice they stop around the 70s or somewhere, and then they kind of forget that he had a lot of information to pass on to us in the 90s. So talk about 90s Rothbard and kind of how it relates to where we're at right now.
One of the things I think is interesting is that the degree to which there is so much to learn from just the 90s as a political period. Scott Horton mentioned how, it was Waco was a radicalizing moment for him, and the experience of seeing that and realizing the horrors of that, and, the federal government, at war with the people of America. And, you think about Bill Kristol. Bill Kristol's entire foreign policy worldview, so he says, was shaped by the experiences of American intervention in the Baltics. And he saw this as a successful form of interventionism. And ever since then, that has been his framework for how America should operate. You think about these battles that are going on right now in terms of communications. The battles in the early 90s was the free speech doctrine, because we're going to have to figure out a way to silence this alternative media of political talk radio, which was always conservative talk radio. Rush Limbaugh was the equal opposition. There's so many parallels to what the situation that exists today was then. So I think part of that has to do with kind of the massive period and changeover in foreign policy perspectives, Cold War changeover to kind of moving to a post-war on terror sort of world, et cetera. And so when you look at what Rothbard's commentary during this period, and Lou Rockwell's commentary from this period, one of the things that stands out is the degree to which they sound like Tucker Carlson today. Their concerns about the moral state of America, their recognition that libertarianism, the movement that erupted around it, was insufficient for the promotion of liberty in the U.S. Part of that was, based off the experiences that Ron Paul had faced in the LP in the past. Part of it was just kind of dealing with the fact that, the American political movement, libertarian movement as a real movement, was started in the 70s. It was about 20 years later that Rothbard was responding to. And I think many of us here, we're kind of products of that 08, 012 revolution. So again, I think some parallels there. And what you see in his articles there, in his framework, is that what you have is a large percentage of the population, right-wing America, recognizing that they are the victims of the American regime. And that if our goal as libertarians is to oppose the state because we hate the state, and if we would have the ability, we'd push the button to end the state, we should be doing everything we can to tap into this movement that is not libertarian in nature, that exists independently from our libertarian magazines and our libertarian ecosystems and all these debates that libertarians like to get into. And we should be trying to play a role in shaping this anger towards the regime to our ends. And he was motivated, he was inspired by that because of the experiences of libertarian scholars in the old right, where, the libertarians were always a minor part of, in terms of foot power, but always had an outsized impact in terms of the ideas motivating these political movements. And I think if you feel the anger and the frustration, the weaknesses in the institutions that exist, I think that's the one common theme. One of the things that's great about this event is we have so many different speakers here from completely different outlets, but all of them were hitting on the failure of this neoliberal regime that's dominated the West and by extension the world, since the 90s. All these fractures are coming about, and we know this regime is weak, and we know the energy to topple it is coming from the right, just as where the threat was in the 90s. And so I think that for those of us who have libertarian ideas, who have a respect for these ideas, the ideology of non-aggression, property rights, et cetera, the best way of engaging of it in shaping better outcomes is doing like Rothbard did back in the day, and building coalitions with people like Pedro Gonzalez at Chronicles Magazine. People like the Claremont Institute, which, I don't want to get into their opinions about Abraham Lincoln, but, they're fighting the regime at the intellectual level. People like Mike Cernovich, things like that. And if we can move past trying to identify reasons to criticize common enemies of the regime, instead identify common ground with common enemies of the regime, we will be better off as a movement. And that was, I think, a big part of Rothbard's guiding strategy with the paleo approach of the Rothbard Rockwell Report and other outlets like that.
We're talking about the neoliberal world order that's been thrown around a lot today. And let's go back even further. another statement or two that you've made that's kind of rubs some people the wrong way. The Enlightenment. Is it good or bad? It sounds pretty good. Talk about the Enlightenment and maybe where that's led, along with the tradition of liberal America and how that's worked out.
Okay, got to figure out how to answer this in less than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So as I started trying to solve this problem of how do we take these libertarian ideas and bring them into the world? How do we engineer a society that everyone within the society is incentivized to, for example, respect the non-aggression principle? How do you create that situation? How do you engineer that outcome? And so as I began this process of studying, that's basically the problem I was trying to solve. Okay, how do you build an incentive structure that will incentivize everyone to buy into this specific system and all agree to this system of property rights? Because ultimately, property rights are a matter of consensus. It's the reason you have property is because either you single-handedly have the force sufficient to ward anybody off, or everybody else agrees that it's your property and they respect it and they're not going to come take it from you. Ultimately, it's a realization of consensus. So I started trying to go back and figure out, okay, well, where did this system come from? How did we get to where we are now? Because if I can figure out the dynamics that led us from, say, 1776 to 1865 to 1931 to all the way up, if you can kind of start plotting a trajectory and figure out what are the dynamics here that are creating the current world that we have, and how can we start tweaking them to create a better world, a more ideal world. Instead of going around trying to ask people to create it for us, how do we just start manipulating people into what we're wanting them to do? If we believe that these ideas will be better for everybody and everyone will benefit from it, then how can we, respecting the laws of non-aggression, how can we create an outcome where everybody is incentivized to buy into the system? How can we create it and get people to come? So it's been a long journey, and I don't remember all the steps that I took in getting there, but I was going back further and further in history and got down to the level of the individual and understanding when this conception of the individual was first appeared on the scene, and people started thinking along the lines of an individual rather than a family or a tribe or a nation. When did people start thinking like individuals? And I noticed that there was dual trajectories that happened at the same time in the political sphere and in the religious sphere. While for anybody who's not super familiar with church history, basically there was, within the Christian church, there was a great schism in 1054 where the Western church and the Eastern church split from each other. And then 500 years later was Martin Luther with the 95 Theses, and that was the beginning of the Reformation. And since the initiation of the Reformation, there's been this perpetual decentralization, religiously speaking, where you go from one single church to I think there's something like 33,000 denominations or something like that today. And I noticed that at the exact same time that trajectory was happening within the religious sphere, it was happening in the political sphere as well, where you go from monarchy, where there's one single sovereign, to every single individual is sovereign. Sovereignty is something that is held by every single person. But that's not even functionally possible. You can't, in practice, have every single person be a sovereign. It's literally the definition of chaos. Ultimately, inevitably, groups of people form themselves into collectives, and they delegate their sovereignty away to somebody else who makes them big promises and whatever. And obviously, there's that process is fraught with mistakes, but it happens invariably in every single human organization. It always happens that the majority of people delegate away their sovereignty to a small minority of people. And coming from a Christian background, I kind of started going through a bit of a I guess kind of a renaissance or something in my own life, where I started. I was exposed to Orthodox Christianity, which is just such a vastly different thing than Protestant Christianity that I grew up with. And within Orthodoxy, there isn't really that conception of the individual the way that it's thought of in the Western world. So I started chasing down this concept of the individual and basically got to Descartes. I think, therefore I am. And that's sort of become the ethos of Western civilization, that man is first and foremost a rational individual who is, you have this kind of implicit blank slate thinking where every person comes into the world as a blank slate, and then they have free will. Their free will is they're able to create their own world, and we sort of imagine that man is this self-directed machine with free will, free to choose whatever life they want, and that just doesn't map to reality. You don't have infinite choices to choose from for what you're going to do with your life. When you're born into a limited set of circumstances. You're born into a network of family, a network of obligations. You're not born as an individual. You're born as a son or a daughter or a brother or a sister or a grandson or a granddaughter. You're born into a relationship, and those relationships come with obligations. You're obligated, whether it's respect or respecting the rights of other people. All of these things are ideas that libertarians are very keenly aware of the idea of human rights. But there isn't much conversation about human responsibilities. What are humans responsible for? And it was going down this train of thought that I realized that there was a poison in the Enlightenment, that the reduction of society to the atomized human individual is actually incredibly toxic for human cultures. Human beings are healthiest when they think of themselves as members of a tribe, as members of a family, as members of a neighborhood. We identify ourselves with respect to the people that we belong to. So like you asked me about being a libertarian, and part of my hesitation is I don't want to give myself a label, because part of the power of labeling yourself is that other people start defining you by the other people who label themselves that way. And this is kind of this paradox of identity, that we identify ourselves as the thing that makes us different from everyone else. Like, I'm a libertarian, unlike everybody else. But when I say I'm a libertarian, I'm saying I'm a libertarian just like all these other people here. And people will understand me as a libertarian based on other people who they know as libertarians. So I guess when I made the statement that the Enlightenment was a mistake, I did it in part to just be kind of provocative and shitpost and kind of throw a thought out there and see what people do with it, which is kind of a lot of the way I like to talk, the way I like to communicate with people. I like to just throw ideas out and then see what people do with it. If I throw an idea out and I go see what other people say about it, how they react to it, how it hits them, then I learn something. I learned something about those people. I learned something about myself. I learned something about the world. So I made this statement that the Enlightenment was a mistake, because the Enlightenment, we've been conditioned to believe it. I mean, it's the freaking Enlightenment. Like, it's given the best name ever. They've got great propagandists. And the key insight that came from the Enlightenment was this idea of the human as an individual. And ultimately, it's led us on a trajectory toward a deification of the self. And I'll say this last thing with this, that one of the guys who was very influential in kind of sending me down this pathway of thought is a guy named Curtis Jarvin. Many people know him as Mitch's Moldbug, and he's a bit of a controversial guy, but he's an atheist. He's a devout atheist, but he's the one who first pointed out to me as I was reading him that modern popular American culture is Christian. It's not just Christian, it's Puritan Christianity. This is something that Thad talks about a lot. But not just in like, oh, it's like it, but it's literally historically, if you trace the sociology all the way back, it's literally a descendant of a very specific brand of Protestant Christianity that has just become secularized. I think the way he framed it, I don't remember if I thought this or if he did, but basically the Reformation continued to the point where it reformed Christ right out of the church. But it needed something else to put in there. Once we've created this void, what are we going to put in the place of God? What is going to be our God? The Enlightenment said the human self, the idealized human individual, maybe like Nietzsche's Übermensch. We all have in our minds this conception of the ideal person, and we subconsciously compare ourselves to that ideal person when we're trying to decide whether something is good or bad. It happens on such a subconscious level that most people may not even be completely aware of it, but I've seen lots of people talk about it, that people have this conception of I call it the capital I individual. And when people begin thinking of things along the lines of individualism, they think about it in that sense. They don't think of themselves as an individual. They abstract out the ideal individual. How would this policy affect the ideal individual? Not specific individuals, the ideal individual. And that was a product of the Enlightenment. That was kind of maybe like the apotheosis of the Enlightenment, was this conception of the self, and then the ultimate deification of it, the worship of the self.
The best part about having PalomaVerdeCBD.com as a sponsor is not even that the products are amazing, because they are. That's not even the best part. It's once you order these products and use them over and over, you know, because I'm telling you, that you're supporting a truly good couple. The people behind PalomaVerdeCBD.com, Carlos and Vanessa out of San Antonio, very wonderful people, hardworking, and very much like-minded. And they're providing you these wonderful products, the mint CBD tinctures. Check this out, the sleep bundle. I know sometimes some of you have issues sleeping. It's very common these days. You won't once you buy their sleep bundle. They've got the CBD gummies, of course. They've got soft gels, salve sticks. I've ranted and raved many times about the cool menthol sports cream. Those of you guys and ladies that work out and lift and you get a little sore, I'm telling you, this is the absolute best sports cream I've ever used. And you've heard it many times, but I can't brag enough on their pet products, the CBD dog chews and the pet CBD tinctures. Both of my French bulldogs, George and Lux, both use these products. They may not know they use them, but I can tell you, Lux is the old one. He used to kind of waddle around like a little old man French bulldog. I put the CBD tinctures on his food every morning, and now he can actually keep up with his younger brother George, who darts around the yard and chases squirrels. But I put these CBD dog chews and the pet tinctures in their food every morning and every evening. You will not be sorry if you give these guys business. Help out your sleep, your muscles, your anxiety. They've got stuff for that, of course, and your pets. Everything here is wonderful and good, as are the people behind the business. And of course, since they support this show and you listen to this show, you get 25% off your entire order when you type in promo code BUCK. That's me, of course, BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout. Get you 25% off of your order when you go over to PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Please give these great people some business. You will not be sorry. And you're helping out the Counterflow podcast. You're helping us keep the lights on, as they say. That's PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code BUCK. Get you 25% off. Let's get back to the show.
Well, I mean, there's nothing to what you just said. We can do open Q&A right now. You don't have to go stand back there by that mic. It's kind of informal. It's like y'all are in my living room. In fact, you're just outside of my living room. So raise your hand if you got a question. James Gentleman, I somehow knew you were good. I saw your eyes. Go ahead, James. And real quick, he mentioned Descartes. Does anyone know how he died? He was trampled by a horse, which is where you get don't put the cart before the horse. James, go ahead.
Boo.
My question is for you, though.
Mm-hmm.
Your tactic of purging the university system of Marxists seems like political suicide to me, no matter how you do it. How do you do that without losing every ounce of political capital that you had legislatively down the line?
By being popular. Most your average American doesn't want Marxists in universities.
I don't know. I'm going to push back a little bit. Your average Floridian might not.
Okay.
But right now, like Florida is kind of a laughingstock in Minnesota, for instance.
Okay.
And I don't think that your average Floridian wants to be a laughingstock. You're going, when you do that, if you remove Marxism legislatively, then you're violating, academic freedom and all this stuff.
No, you're not.
All the stuff that the right has been saying.
You're not.
For years. You're violating these professors' rights.
No, you're not.
No, you are.
No, you're not.
You are if people say you are. And so then people call you a hypocrite and people call you
people were saying Ron DeSantis was killing Floridians because they weren't backing Fauci. People are going to say whatever they want. Your average, I don't care what a progressive in Minnesota thinks. What matters is that the people, I mean, like the majority of Americans don't want their kids going to universities and then hating their country. They don't want them coming back from universities and hating them. And so what you're doing is you're de-weaponizing the university system against the people paying for the university system. And I think that's popular.
Have you pulled that?
No, but people don't want their kids to be used against them. I think this is obvious.
There's also a way that this can be done without it being explicitly a purge necessarily. It takes people who are of that mind putting themselves in the position where they can start firing teachers.
Right, but it's going to be judged as such, right? It's going to be presented in the worst possible case. But I don't care. The optics don't matter. The enemies are going to portray anything meaningful that is achieved by politics is going to be portrayed as fascist, et cetera, et cetera. There's no way of having a respectable use of government power to any ends that we here want.
But what about cultural power?
Okay.
It doesn't have that right. That's what I'm driving.
Okay, so how do we do it? One way that would do it is you put people in the university system that promote our cultural values.
You have to put them in the media too.
Okay, fine. But the difference is that we don't fund. Like, I mean, I'm perfectly okay with purging Florida state-funded TV and stacking it full of people here. The problem is, I mean, your average Floridian doesn't watch Florida state TV, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the issue, is that we're not funding the New York Times explicitly. So like, that aspect, I'm not saying that we should be creating state-based media and elevating that. I'm saying what we do currently fund is the university system. What we do currently fund is the public school system. And so what we should be doing is that, to the extent that we are funding these things, we should be making sure that we are funding things that aren't undermining us.
I hope you're successful.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you.
Yellow shirt.
I do wonder if we can get more people into the creative areas. I mean, more libertarian singers, movie directors, authors, producers. I'm not sure why we're not doing that. I'm not that far. I don't agree with them on a lot of things. But one person who understands this more than anybody is Fox Day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that guy gets stuff done, whether you like it or not. He gets stuff done. I mean, he's predicting also that Google is eventually going to poison the world's DNS, which I totally buy into. And he's talking now about comic books, which are apparently being glorified too. I think that's one thing. How can we get more freedom material into those areas?
Thoughts, Matt?
I've said for a while now that the liberty movement, which people typically take as a political organization or a not an actual explicit organization, but an organization of people pursuing things politically, that the liberty movement needs to be and will be in business, education, and entertainment. And the latter two are subsets of the first one. Ultimately, political outcomes are dictated by those with money. This is just a fact of the world. And everyone knows that politicians are for sale. That's Popular Liberty, our friend Andrew. He said, if the politicians are for sale, then buy them. Why is this so difficult? And to your question, ultimately, the majority of people, the majority of the culture is driven by entertainers. It's all entertainment. Cable TV is all entertainment. And there's this unfortunate reality that people who tend to be either libertarian or right-wing oriented, anyone except their leftism correlates highly with creativity. And creativity is persuasive. So leftism tends to be very, very persuasive. And people who value liberty the way that the majority of people in these circles do don't tend to give that much weight to that sort of thing. And I think that that's exactly what you're driving at. That's where people are not convinced through their minds. They're convinced through their hearts. And you're not going to get to their hearts with charts and graphs. You're going to get to their hearts through media.
And of course, Ayn Rand understood that as well.
Yes.
Yep.
Brooke.
Okay, I don't know exactly if this is a question, Matt, but I kind of want you to go back to the concept of the self, especially related to Christianity. I get where you're coming from. You're born into a church and a family and a culture, but as a Christian mom, I always tell my kids that they are a special and unique individual because they are made in the image and likeness of God. That's very different than our society's conceptualization of the self. So their job is to discern the will of God and do it and submit themselves to that authority, where in our culture, it's do whatever you want because it feels good and you have the right to be whoever you want to be. And I think those are like diametrically opposed, but sometimes people use the same language when they're talking about it.
Right. It's the dichotomy is between rights and responsibilities. And this is where I think that libertarians in general have done themselves a disservice by emphasizing rights so much. If you're leading with rights, you're not going to get them. If you lead with responsibility, you'll get the rights. This is a law of the universe. The people who are the most powerful are the people who have taken responsibility for what was placed in front of them. If you take responsibility for the task that's placed in front of you and you complete it, you'll be rewarded with more tasks. And the more that you complete, the more that you are rewarded. And this is ultimately it's a status game. And the status isn't the point. It's the completion it's the acceptance of the responsibility and the purification that brings your own life. When you accept responsibility for, Jordan Peterson says, clean your room. Start right here. Accept responsibility for this thing. Once you've done that, then go out, go to your family. Accept responsibility for your family. Once you've done that, go out to your neighborhood and then to your county, and you can go all the way out. There's the great liberal lie is that you are an individual, you are an atomized unit whose happiness is the most important thing in the world. And when you are pursuing that happiness, you're not going to find it. People never wind up finding their happiness by pursuing it for themselves. They go do something else and the happiness comes with it. One thing that was very interesting to me was learning that where in the Bible where it says made in the image of God, that's actually a slight mistranslation, even though a lot of people use it that way. It actually means made to image God. We are made to be his imagers. So we are again, that's a I disappear and he shines through. So again, it's a diminution of the self. Now that doesn't mean that you're worthless or you don't have any value or that God doesn't love you, you aren't special. It's not that the self doesn't exist or doesn't matter or isn't valuable. It's that when you make the self the foundation of your worldview, you're building on a foundation of sand. And you can see that, right, exactly. And you can see that when you're born into a family, you're born in with obligations to the rest of your family. And before you're even aware of yourself, you have already been imprinted upon by your culture. So you're not even the one dictating the ingredients that make you up. You're given a hand and you play that hand. You weren't responsible for giving yourself that hand. Eventually, your responsibility plays into it. But ultimately, when you build a life that says you have all of these rights and everyone has to you have the right to be treated in a certain way by a bunch of different people, it's putting the cart before the horse. And when you reframe that and you reframe it as everything is my fault, I'm the one who needs to take responsibility for my life. No matter what happens to me, it's my fault. People hear that and they think, well, that seems oppressive, but it's actually incredibly empowering because if it's your fault, you're the one who can change it. If it's somebody else's fault, you have to go ask them to change it for you. And then you get into the nature of the system, which is it incentivizes people to come into the system asking for something from it, and then it will get you trapped into it.
Somebody,
right.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. So I think I may get myself in a little trouble here, so I'm sorry. But
join the club.
I have a little bit of a different perspective on some of this stuff because my journey to and through libertarianism has sort of been at light speed. So in my younger days, I was kind of very left-wing oriented and actually got involved in a lot of political activism. Growing up in the 80s, all the repression came from the right. So it was like, well, that pushed me to the left. And I got very disgusted and cynical about the world of political activism and kind of pushed all that aside. And I became a lawyer and I started out my career as a public defender. So like actively engaged with the state to keep people's bodies out of prison. About as direct a fight with the state. And then from there I started representing mostly small businesses, family farms, which is what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And a lot of that work is state business in California. So state bureaucratic agencies coming at my clients, we're going to take what you have, we are going to hurt you and your family. And I fight that battle. And part of what has been frustrating for me for this whole libertarian liberty movement whole thing is like even a day like this, we have all these heady ideas. Our heads are way, way up here in these intellectual clouds. But down here, there's a war being fought. And regular people, these farmers I represent, have never heard of Lockhart, never heard of Mises, and don't care.
Yes.
But they are engaged in California is actively trying to destroy its dairy industry, like the core of my clientele. And these people are engaged in a fight with the government on a daily basis. And they know that the Republican Party has abandoned them, can't do anything for them, and won't do anything for them. And they know the Democrats are literally their mortal enemies to the point where they've come and like taken their land for high-speed rail and all kinds of shit that's being done. Where is the point at which, and that's why I got fed up with libertarianism, because what drew me into libertarianism was I started doing pro bono representation, which you and I have talked about, for businesses in my own community that defied the lockdowns and got code enforcement citations and liquor alcohol, beverage control citations, and stuff like that for being open during the lockdowns. And I was like, I'm not going to let this happen. I'll represent you guys for free. We started fighting those battles. So that drew me to libertarianism because I heard about the Mises Caucus, and I'm like, well, these people are spouting all this rhetoric, aggressive rhetoric online. They're going to want to help. And I need help. I can't do this by myself. I'm a small firm. We can get people, I had this whole idea, we can get people together, and these are the kind of people that'll do it. And then all they're doing is fundraising for like winning bullshit Libertarian Party convention seats and quitting so they can quit their fucking day jobs, and it's this whole like it had nothing to do with helping people who are like losing their businesses today, right now.
Yes.
How do we get people in this libertarian, liberty movement sphere who have all these ideas that are up here to get their eyes down here and put themselves in between, regardless of those people's ideological or political views, in between those people and the state machinery that wants to destroy them? Because you want to make an ally with somebody, you want to convince somebody that your way is the way, save their fucking business.
Yes.
And they will be with you, trust me. I mean, they did it to me. I irritated people at the state level in California. They put me on trial in spring, the State Bar of California, and tried to take my license away. And I literally had 50 different people, and then I got, my lawyer said, I need you to get some people that are willing to testify for you. In an hour, I had 50. And she's like, wow, usually, like, we struggle to get like 3 or 4, because it's usually corrupt lawyers that get in this situation. I had an army of people ready to stand by my side who are not, a lot of my clients are not educated people, like they've never been to universities, they know cows, they know the ground, they know how to grow crops, but they're not, but you build allies by protecting.
Yes.
How do we get this movement and all of us, people who have these ideas of liberty, to get our fucking heads out of this intellectual horse shit and down here where there's a fight to be fought and real battles to be won, and you don't get your name in the paper, you don't get famous, nobody wants me on a podcast, but I could literally I could rattle off in 10 minutes, I could rattle off 25 different businesses that I literally saved from going under in the last 20 years. And there are many, many more. Every time I go to one of their conventions, they're like, I see people who are like, we wouldn't be here anymore if it wasn't for you. Right? You talk about happiness, like, that means more to me than any money I've ever made doing this work. And, but how do we get there to where we get these libertarian machines or this libertarian culture, as small as it is, to engage in the actual war with the government that's happening, that is actually hurting people today? Now, I'm not changing the universities, though, and I'm not trying to be difficult with you, but not transforming the universities, not winning political office, but stop them from taking people's fucking money.
Yes. The two go hand in hand, though.
They do, but you know what? I've been doing this long enough that I have been doing it through Republican administrations and Democratic administrations, and it's the same shitty bureaucrats.
Yes.
No matter who's in power, I'm dealing literally with the same guy.
Sure.
And I had all my clients who were so excited. Oh, now that Trump's in office, the Department of Labor is going to leave us alone. Now, they raped them even harder under Trump. I went to a fundraiser for Devin Nunes, who's in my area that I'm in. I gave that asshole $3,500 to have breakfast with him, just so I could say, you have to stop what the Department of Labor is doing to our clients, your constituents. You know what happened with that? One of his aides said, oh, that's very nice, we'll contact you. Nothing. Right? So, but again, I still had to deal with those cases and protect those people. So below that level, there's a battle where you'll win hearts and minds and save people's businesses.
Yes.
And there's shit to be done today. So how do you get this motivation and this passion that people have to engage in that fight that most people aren't even aware is going on?
Well, the good thing is, I mean, you do have different outfits that deal with some of this stuff, perhaps not enough. You have the Institute for Justice that does a lot of this stuff. We always use more of it. I do think that there are certain distractions in the movement. I think that, if you're looking to organize, whether it's financial resources through small donations or energy for protests and things like that, I mean, the worst possible outcome in investing this sort of energy, time, and resources would be through a third-party outfit. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that is part of the issue there, is that, if you take, for example, the same sort of fundraising apparatus of like the LP Mises Caucus, and you simply remove the LP aspect of it, instead had a nonpartisan political PAC that could dive into things from a very nimble perspective, even if most of the things end up being advocated for libertarian capital L ends, that would be a way of utilizing a network of donors and energy and podcast networks and all of that, perhaps closer to some of the initiatives that you're identifying there. But I do think that there's not a one size fits all issue. It's not all, if we just have a whole bunch of things invested in legal advocacy, we're going to solve this sort of stuff. I mean, the intellectual dynamic. I mean, one of the reasons why California and Florida are different is because the intellectual differences between those states. And so there's going to be some areas of the country where for all of the amount of energy and effort that libertarians want to have, there's going to be limits to what can be practically achieved with the institutions that currently exist. But I think it does require an all-size-fits-all approach where, the different dynamics where you're trying to make a change towards a more libertarian direction, you need to play within the rules and the power structures of that area that you're trying to help. So that we are effective with the way that we use our resources. But again, I don't think there's a single silver bullet to address all of or even enough of the injustice out there. What we do need to do, though, is take advantage of the fact that you have more people now than ever before, not just displeased, but explicitly angry, and recognize the degree to which the federal regime is a direct threat to our livelihoods. That's the anger we need to take advantage of. And the best way to do that is not to provide some sort of ideological filter where we're trying to disassociate ourselves because of, XYZ nuanced political issue. We should be willing to ally with people that aren't okay with recreational heroin. And I think that's one of those things where, again, taking advantage of that moment as it exists and try to broaden our base as much as possible, that gives us the opportunities to pursue all sorts of things, perhaps in ways that we haven't been effective in the past.
Comedy show starts in 20 minutes. All right, Matt's going to answer his question, and then we got to get out of here
in less than 5 minutes.
All right. Matt, get it.
So I'll say this: what you need institutions. You need institutions, and you need investment into those institutions. Ultimately, this is a matter of political power, and if you're going to invest in institutions, it needs to be institutions that are actually working on something like this, not that are, like you said, committed toward trying to get people out of their day jobs and that sort of thing. This is why I said a minute ago, I said that the Liberty Movement is in business, education, and entertainment. Business is what you're doing. You would be included in the realm of business, actually solving problems for people. Libertarians talk a big game about the free market, but then when someone suggests, hey, here's a problem that the market isn't solving, it's impossible to get anybody mobilized to go solve that problem. And to innovate within the market to create new solutions that can solve those things. A lot of this stuff is just a matter of infrastructure and institutions that have been co-opted, taken over, and then they've bullied everything else out of the market. And so then the libertarian solution apparently is just to complain that this isn't fair, rather than saying, you know what, fuck it, we don't have those institutions were taken over. We're going to create new ones that are going to actually solve the problem for these people. And I think that starts with actually having a heart for them like you do. There's this mentality to treat people who have voted for other parties as they need to renounce all of the sins of their past, being associated with blood-soaked monsters. They need to abandon all of their prior dogma and pledge fealty to us before we're going to accept them into our group. I think it's an incredibly toxic mentality. And I think that it's standing in the way of actually helping people in a way that, like you said, is going to be compelling to them. And that's ultimately the message of the show I do with Jason Stapleton, Wealth, Power, and Influence, which is that it's the people with wealth, power, and influence that run the world. And if you expect to combat them in any sort of way, and if you want to actually advocate for the people who are victims of those who have wealth, power, and influence and use it badly, you're going to need wealth, power, and influence for yourself. And so part of our goal with that show, with the Nomad Network, and then part of the reason why I just kind of wanted to start putting my voice out and start talking, was to try to incentivize people to move in that direction. Instead of wasting your time with the political party stuff, with especially a third party, start investing. Take whatever skills you have. You like, you're a lawyer. Other people could have other skills where they can go solve problems for people in the world right now. And if you lead with value, this is part of the mythos of the free market, that if you lead with value, you bring value to the market, other people will give you value in return. And if you want people to buy into your political ideology or to share your idea of the ideal world, then it works really well when you lead by solving a problem for them and showing yourself as a good person who cares about them and is invested in their success. Once you've done that, like you pointed out, Tony, they're much more likely to listen to the rest of your ideas.
Most of the business owners that stood up against the lockdown, not libertarians.
And never will be.
They were MAGA people.
Right.
Yeah. Who, a lot of the libertarians I know would be like, oh, they've got to back the blue sticker on the car. Fuck that guy.
Right.
And meanwhile, he's the one that's keeping his restaurant open in the face of the lockdown, while the libertarians are tweeting about it.
Right.
Yes.
Yep.
That's a good ending. Thank you guys so much. Matt Erickson from King Coon, Phil Bishop from Radio Rock Bar and the Music Institute. I'm Buck Johnson. Thank you guys for hanging out here in my backyard. Subscribe to Counterflow YouTube page. I keep trying to pimp that out. I ignored it forever. We're actually doing stuff on there. Thank you so much. Robbie the Fire Bernstein, Kyle Ruff. They're starting at 8, so it's over at Load Off Fannies. Thank you guys. Take it easy.
Thank you guys.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that fun chat with two of my friends live in person at the RU Texas event. Tho Bishop and Matt Erickson, thank you guys for doing that with me. And thank you guys for all of the support over the last year. And like I said, I want to keep growing the audience. And so that would mean subscribe to the YouTube page, spread this show far and wide, as they say. And we've got the Telegram group. You're free to join us in there. It's always good conversations. Twitter, of course, at BuckRebel, BuckRebel, counterflowpodcast.com. And check this out. I'm jumping in to the new year with a bang. Next week, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of the famous now Great Barrington Declaration. These guys, Dr. Jay and a few other doctors, were brave enough to come out early on in 2020 and kind of speak out against the insanity that was being pushed down by the CDC and the WHO and all of this stuff. So I will have Dr. Jay Bhattacharya on next week's episode. We're going to cover a lot, and I want to get everyone up to date on exactly what's real as far as COVID stuff goes right now. Until then, you guys have a great week, and again, Happy New Year. Talk to you soon.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast, a part of the Renegade Media Network.